That's how we can start the video. We cover a lot of strange cases on this channel, as you know, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about a wild one that you might not have heard of, but if you're an old person like me, you've definitely heard of it. This isn't a conspiracy or a strange pahina mina like Bigfoot or the aliens. This is a real life case that occurred in the early 1990s. So picture this, you're sleeping in your bed and then you wake up and you look down and you see your thing, it has been cut in half. It has been cut in half.
My mind couldn't take it. I was very scared. So obviously I snapped. I mean, all the abuse that I had from him, I basically, I cut off his penis because he abused me that much. He abused.
This was the reality of a man named John Wayne Bobbitt, as his wife had severely maimed his body. Now, it's really, really, really important to note that he definitely I don't know if I can say that. He may have deserved it. He was kind of a massive, huge piece of shit. A little bit.
After years of alleged abuse by John, Lorena cut off her husband's penis.
But I don't want to reveal too much information because that sort of takes away from the video, obviously. So who are the Bobbitts? Well, John Wayne Bobbitt, was from Niagara Falls, New York. His family was poor, and his childhood was spent growing up in a rough neighborhood, he claimed. He also claimed that his home was broken into regularly while he was a child. His stuff was constantly stolen, and even his mom was attacked at one point. And this all occurred before he was in preschool. And this eventually led to him being inspired to join the United States Marine Corps instead of going to college. So, hoorah. Hoorah! I love the Marine Corps. This guy's not a great example of a Marine, to be honest. John's wife at the time this incident occurred, Lorena Bobbitt, formerly known as Lorena Leonor Gallo, was born in Buque, Ecuador, I don't know, in 1969.
Así es, nos encontramos en Bucay, amigos,
Un
porque...
pueblo mágico.
Okay, so she's a little bit younger than John Wayne, who was born in 1967, by the way. Lorena's family moved to Caracas, Venezuela.
For reference in Spanish, locally it is said as Caracas, Caracas. In English, however, it is normally said as Caracas,
where her father worked as a dental technician, and at the time, Lorena had fallen in love with the United States, specifically the state of Virginia. My home state. It is beautiful, and Virginia is for lovers. I love Virginia. No barking? Okay. Interesting. Lorena had watched many movies and television shows that made her want to visit the United States. And when she turned 15, her family took her on a trip to the United States, and Lorena at the time knew that she then wanted to live there at the time. It's mind-boggling at the time. I say those things a lot. Keep track, basically. Essentially. After that, her family tried to immigrate into the United States, but were rejected, and in 1987, she was able to obtain a student visa, and her dreams became a reality. When she reached the United States, she worked as a nanny and then at a nail salon while enrolled in a community college. And in 1988, John and Lorena met. At the time, John was still enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, and Lorena was still a student at a local community college. Both were around 20 years old, and in spite of Lorena not speaking fluent English, they hit it off instantaneously. Lorena said that she was swept off of her feet when she first saw John because she wanted the American dream, a house, kids, stable jobs, and John was a man in uniform, and he seemed like an easy, good way to achieve that, like a good way, not like a quick and efficient way, but like this is the way to do it. This guy represents the United States Marine Corps. He's a man in uniform. I trust him. He's a good guy.
Lorena always talked about her American dream, and John, when you saw him in those days, in his uniform and stuff, he fit the profile of the good-looking Marine.
Turns out he wasn't a good guy. He was a massive piece of shit. The relationship, though, started off normal and healthy. At first, they would go on dates to the local movie theater. They would go to ice cream places. It seemed like both parties were happy. But about a year later, on June 18th, the couple would be married and move in together in Manassas, Virginia. And after this, the happiness wouldn't last long. According to Lorena, John would become physically and sexually violent.
The abuse escalated, was not only physical, but it was more mental and isolation, and eventually turned to marital.
And in fact, the Prince William County Police responded to their home regularly for DV complaints. And even John was arrested once for smacking Lorena in the face. And John was charged with assault and battery against Lorena, and Lorena was also charged with the same charges. However, one charge was null crossed, which means it was no longer prosecuted, and the other was dropped entirely. So things were going horribly, and it is clear that Lorena was in a living nightmare.
The day before the attack, she went to the police. She went to the police and she said, I want a protective order against my husband. And they said, okay, well, sit down. This is going to take a little while. We're going to process it. We're going to get this thing done. We want to protect you. And she was not able to wait.
At this time, it's clear to see that Lorena was in a nightmare relationship with this man. Fortunately, both of them decided that divorce was necessary. Extremely fortunately for Lorena, he wasn't putting up a fight much of, but all of this would reach a breaking point just before their divorce on June 23rd, 1993. This was the night of the attack. John would come home extremely drunk from a party, and he would SA Lorena. He would force himself onto her, and then he would fall asleep into their bed.
Did he ask you if he could?
No.
Did you give him permission to?
Their next-door neighbor testified to what he called sounds of painful sex coming from the Bobbitts' apartment the night of the incident.
Lorena, completely traumatized, would go into the kitchen to get herself a drink, and she would see an 8-inch carving knife. She grabbed the knife, walked into the bedroom, removed the sheets, and then chopped John Wayne Bobbitts doink in half, bro. And John, he lay in bed losing massive amounts of blood. Alcohol's a blood thinner, and he's drunk off his ass, so he's passed out in bed. While this was happening, Lorena hopped into her vehicle and fled the scene, and she was driving around in a daze for some amount of time, it's not entirely clear, before she realized that she was still clutching on to the top half of John's doink.
The 7-woman, 5-man jury heard the story of how Mrs. Bobbitt ran from their apartment with Mr. Bobbitt's penis in her hand.
That's crazy. When she realized what she had done, she pulled over, threw the body part into a field, and called 911 because she came to her senses. John was then rushed to the hospital, where doctors were able to stop his bleeding and inform him that he would never be able to have sex again. Shut the f up. Sorry, unbiased reporting. Thankfully, Lorena would inform the police where to find the other half of his doink. And when the police found it, they would throw it on some ice and bring it to the hospital. And in a later story, a retelling, if you will, John would say that the police arrived at the hospital with his ding-doing in a brown hot dog bag inside of a plastic bag surrounded by ice. And after a 9-hour surgery, they were able to somehow, by the grace of God, or this Satan, I don't know, they were able to reattach his doink. And surprisingly, he completely regained the full function of his severed phallus. His doink, as I've been calling it. His frickin' dink doink. Where's Logan Paul at? When later interviewed, John recalled the experience as being extremely frightening and only hurting for a split second when his doink was chopped. He attributed his survival of this event to his Marine Corps training, making the quote and claiming, "But I was very confident of surviving because I was trained in dealing with war, where you can get hurt really badly." So, you know, he's very well spoken. All the same, I presume penile amputation is a bit surprising, and maybe you don't exactly train for that, though. I mean, maybe it came as a bit of a jolt. "I was shocked," he said seriously. "It was like being attacked by a predator." The movie The Predator had just come out a few years before. Lorena would then be arrested by the police and be charged with malicious wounding, which makes sense. She chopped his wiener off. She drove around. She fled the scene. It was malicious. Was it deserved? I'm not one to say, but kind of seemed like it. Like, you know, I don't know if I have to be careful. I don't know if I don't know if he's like litigious or whatever, but in my opinion, it seemed deserved. In my opinion, I feel like I wish they wouldn't have reattached it, in my opinion, so he can't do, you know, it gets worse too. This whole thing does get a lot worse, so. But at this point in the story, I'm of the opinion that This guy's a asshole, piece of shit, this guy. When questioned why she committed the heinous act, she said, "He always have an orgasm and he doesn't wait for me to have an orgasm. He's selfish." That's a real, actual, legitimate quote from the time. And that was the reason that she gave for severing this man's. This will make sense later, by the way, okay? This will make a little bit more sense later. Now on to the arrest and the aftermath. After the arrest of Lorena, the Bobbitt family trial began and gained massive nationwide attention. According to Newsweek, 60% of Americans knew of and or followed the 1994 Bobbitt trial. So, as long as the trial was going along, people were on the edges of their seats waiting to hear the outcome of the Bobbitt story. Now, I was born in 1996, but I remember my mom and dad talking about this. I wasn't alive when the trial was going on, but I remember I remember the dude got his wiener chopped. I was like, who's that? Who's that? Who's that guy? And then they talked about, so I'm very well aware of it, have been for a really long time, and I'm very grateful to be able to spread light on this terrible situation and hopefully give credit where credit is due to Lorena in this situation, all right? Because this is up, and I didn't know how up it was until I actually started researching it. I thought it wasn't as bad as it actually was. It's way worse than I thought it was. When the trial started, Lorena would inform the judge and jury of the awful things that John had done to her during their relationship.
Lorena Bobbitt claims constant physical and mental abuse by her husband drove her to an irrational impulse to harm him. At this morning's session of the trial, Lorena Bobbitt told stories of the abuse she says she endured during her 4 years of marriage.
The new revealed details included him ostentatiously showing off his infidelity during their relationship and allegedly forcing her to have an abortion as well. So on top of all the other things, the essay, all this stuff, this guy is allegedly a gigantic piece of shit in the trial.
Attorney James Lowe asked about a time in 1990 when Lorena Bobbitt became pregnant and says her husband forced her to have an abortion.
He was very upset because I was pregnant, and he said that he doesn't want to have a child. He also said that he doesn't want me to have a baby, so he said that do whatever the rest of the girls in trouble do.
Lorena's defense lawyers argued that due to John's constant harassment and mental torture, Lorena was always on guard and stressed, leading her to snap and eventually lash out in the form of chopping his doink in half. Her defense team also claimed that due to John's actions, she was suffering from clinical depression and PTSD, which would absolutely 110% make sense given the circumstances. John would obviously deny all of these claims, but upon further investigation, it was found that most of John's statements conflicted with one another and that he couldn't get his story straight, which means he's a liar. That guy, him. I can finally say it. There we go. John's statements were quoted as they had not had sex, that Lorena had tried to initiate sex, but he had been too tired, and that they had had sex, but he had slept through it, and that the sex had been consensual. Whatever that means, bro. I don't know what the that even means. What is he saying? What is he saying? He's like lying. He's conflicting himself with the same sentence. How do you even do that? How do you say something so conflicting? Lorena explained that the couple had financial trouble, which resulted in John stealing her earrings and jewelry, selling them, and then spending the money on other things, which is horrible. And witnesses would testify against John, claiming that he mentally and physically abused her, and that as time went on, things escalated and got worse and worse and worse.
But the heart of the testimony came as the defense tried to prove that Lorena Bobbitt was justified in doing what she did. A string of witnesses told stories of physical and verbal abuse of Lorena by John.
He kicked me. He told me that I told you not to cry. And he slapped me on my face. He pulled my hair. And he squeezed my face.
I again witnessed extensive bruising over the top and sides of Ms. Bobbitt's skull, into her hairline and face line, and down her neck and shoulders again as before. I did not, however, notice that all through the rest of her body as before.
Her depression was very noticeable. Her sadness was very noticeable, and occasionally when she was doing my nails, she would burst into tears.
And because of this, Lorena's attorneys would argue that due to the patterns of abuse that she suffered, her action of chopping off his doink was an act of overall self-defense and could be chalked up to temporary insanity, as that was their official claim. It was an irresistible impulse, temporary insanity. You know, it makes sense. I'd be willing to believe that, to be honest. A crime of passion. And it may sound weak. I'm not sure. You guys are legal people out there, but legally it is a viable defense, and to me it does make sense. For example, back in 1981, John Hinckley failed to assassinate Ronald Reagan, and he was found not guilty due to reason of insanity. And this would lead to Congress passing the Insanity Defense Reform Act, which made it more difficult for legal defenses to argue insanity on behalf of their clients. So by reason of insanity is more difficult to claim now, but it is a reason, a viable reason. And by the way, Lorena got fairly lucky at the time because many states were quick to ratify the act into their own constitutions, but Virginia had yet to do so, meaning that the argument in Lorena's case was still a very viable option and the best option for her.
Both prosecutors and defense lawyers called psychologists and psychiatrists to testify to the state of Mrs. Bobbitts' mental health.
She had an acute deterioration of her mental state at that time and became psychotic.
That's the basis of the defense, that Lorena Bobbitt, who says she was raped that night, had an irresistible impulse to slice off her husband's penis.
After all the evidence was presented, the jury would comb tirelessly through it and eventually reach a verdict. First, Lorena was found not guilty because of insanity caused by an irresistible urge to hurt John.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Lorena Lenore Bobbitt, not guilty of malicious wounding as charged in the indictment by reason of insanity. Signed, Clay S. Kokalis, foreperson.
Therefore, she was not responsible for the damages done to him, and John, on the other hand, was acquitted of marital SA. Following the case, though, a judge ordered Lorena to be evaluated and housed at the Central State Hospital in Petersburg, Virginia, for at least 45 days.
As the statute requires a mandatory commitment for an observation period of a minimum of 45 days.
And following her release in 1995, John and Lorena Bobbitt officially divorced after 6 years of marriage. There it is, really. With all the media attention surrounding the case, both Lorena and John gained small amounts of notoriety and stardom. I mean, this thing was huge in the 90s, and this is pre-internet. And it gets really, really, really sad and cringe here for John Wayne Bobbitt. Following the trial, John Wayne Bobbitt starred in two... If you couldn't have guessed, they were both incredibly unsuccessful and failed spectacularly. Specifically, they failed to generate enough revenue to pay for anything, really, fortunately. His band, Severed Parts, also never really caught on and ultimately failed as well. Severed Parts, that's a good, that's a great name. That's a really good name, John Wayne Bobbitt. It's very smart. Very smart name. When the case was still going on, John went on the Howard Stern show. John also called into the show another time with his new girlfriend, where they again talk about the story and how his newest girlfriend claims that she is also being beaten, and they begin to make light of the situation and crack some jokes at her expense.
Now let me get this straight, Christine. Why do you want to marry John if you're accusing him of beating you? Because
I think that to get through to John...
You have to marry him?
No. Howard, don't be putting words in my mouth.
No, I don't understand why you would marry a guy who gave you a black eye.
Why marry him?
Christina Howard, I don't want to get married.
Oh, you don't want to get married?
I don't want to get married.
Even though she's claiming that she's being beaten actively by this man. Once again, this interview happened while the case was still going on, and this was pre-trial. So the interview sort of established that Lorena was crazy in the minds of all the people who are big Stern guys, big shock jock guys. And heading into the trial, it seemed like a kind of planned PR move that might have helped in the long run. If he could somehow demonstrate that she was actually crazy, it might change people's opinions of him because he's like, he's a terrible guy. John, aside from all this, would experience a string of other legal troubles following and during the trial. During the trial in 1994, John was also charged with striking a 21-year-old exotic dancer named Christina Elliott, who he met in Las Vegas. And at the time, the two persons happened to be engaged, but after the incident, they called it off. Eventually, because of that, he was convicted of battery and would serve 15 days in jail, and he would deny any claims of being violent, in spite of being convicted and serving 15 days for battery. Wow, 15 days. That's a lot. That seems like a lot. I'm being sarcastic, by the way. That's not very much time to spend in jail for just serially beating women. What the f? In 1999, John would be put on probation for being a part of a theft in Nevada, and in 2003, he was sentenced to prison time for violating his probation after he was charged with, you guessed it, battery against his then wife, Joanna Farrell. This guy's a piece of shit. It's crazy. He would be arrested 2 more times for battery against Farrell and would divorce her in 2004. Unfortunately, with his still intact. His fucking Franken or whatever that thing is. What the? So during John's big time after the trial, after he moved to Las Vegas, John would have multiple jobs and even appear on the WWF's Monday Night Raw is War in 1998.
Yes! There he is! It's John Wayne Bobbitt!
The guy was everywhere doing everything and somehow still unable to be successful with his stupid movies and his dumbass band name. But it's crazy. He continued to beat women, his wives, and I mean, nowadays there's an update, a recent update. The most recent update on John is in April of 2024. He had to have his toes amputated due to toxic peripheral polyneuropathy.
Toxic neuropathy is another common type of peripheral neuropathy. Diabetes, of course, is one of the most common, but we've found multiple different toxins that can cause nerve damage and cause the peripheral neuropathy.
And this is believed to be caused by exposure to harmful chemicals at Camp Lejeune, where he was stationed originally when he was in the Marine Corps. Chemicals in the water. There's a lot of chemicals in the water in Camp Lejeune. It's like actually a really big issue.
Contaminated water at Camp Lejeune has been linked to serious health problems, including cancers, neurological diseases, reproductive diseases, and many other health concerns. If you are exposed to this tainted water and experience any of these issues with your health, the Camp Lejeune Justice Act of 2022 may make it possible for you to finally recover a significant settlement.
So I do concede that that is a terrible thing, and I feel bad that that has happened to, not him, I don't really give a fuck about him, but that has happened to a lot of Marines. There is a lot of problems with the water, the drinking water, and the fire retardant foam that leaked into the drinking water. Big issue, guys. Big issue, guys. Hey, man, hopefully the government doesn't forget about the people who give up their lives to protect and serve it. You know, hopefully they don't forget about them. Hopefully they forget about this guy, but not the others. As for Lorena, after all this stuff went down, she tried to stay away from the spotlight as much as possible, which is a sign of a healthy mind, ironically enough. In 1996, she was invited by the then president of Ecuador, Abdallah Bucaram, to lunch at the National Palace, which is pretty cool. Somewhat ironically enough, though, in 1997, Lorena would be charged and then acquitted of assault for punching her mother while watching TV. What is up with this shit? These people are actually both crazy. What is going on? I've never seen anybody I don't know anybody who's ever punched anybody without them deserving it. What the In 2007, she moved to Washington, D.C., where she founded Lorena's Red Wagon Foundation, which led to the founding of the Lorena Gallo organization in 2018, which is dedicated to preventing domestic violence. Okay, that's awesome. Cool. Lorena would remarry, have a child, and lead a relatively normal life, striving to actually make a difference in the situations for women that were in her situation. However, she couldn't stay out of the spotlight forever. John and Lorena met once on the TV show The Insider in 2009, and on the show, they recount the events of that night. That's right, they got on TV together. These people talked after this shit. I couldn't imagine that. And they both tried to portray the other as the perpetrator of the wrong. Following the interview, both parties were relatively quiet, and their story entered pop culture again and was referenced in Family Guy and other movies and TV shows and popular media. It's been referenced a lot.
I'll be more of a gentleman than John Wayne Bobbitt with his second wife.
Hey, honey, would you take out the trash?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Love it, love it. What else?
Well, I have been dying to see that new Rebel Wilson movie. I hear she raps, like, a lot.
Let's just do this.
In fact, multiple musical artists, Weird Al, Essenfu, Lizzo, a whole bunch of people have made references to this insane crime and situation in their songs. Famous sculptor Mary Beth Edelson created a life-size monument titled Kali Bobbit in 1994, and this is before the end of the trial, so Mary Beth was like onto something here. And in this sculpture, the main woman is inspired by the Hindu goddess Kali, which stands for time, death, violence, sexuality, and female empowerment, and also motherly love. That's a lot of things that seemingly contradict that this thing stands for. Edelson took inspiration from the Bobbitt case and added unique details to the Kali statue. Some interesting details include Lorena standing on a ziggurat, a belt of knives, and her model also holding a severed. So yeah, that's a thing. In recent years, Lorena has really sort of come back to the forefront and has done numerous interviews with various news outlets and has been the subject of a TV series and even a movie. In recent interviews, she has come out defending herself from the image that the media has portrayed of her since the case has happened, because there's so many people that just believe that she's completely insane, which the whole punching your mom in the face thing, that's crazy. But like overall, I think it's clear who the real bad, I mean, it's pretty clear. Lorena has constantly had to deal with the media portraying her as an insane person, which is definitely somewhat true for sure. But PR of the Howard Stern interview did a lot of damage, and she's been sort of instilled in people's minds as a result of the pop culture interactions back then. And now she's finally speaking out about it. And by God, if you look at their track records, hers is way better. So like, it's kind of obvious as to who's better. In 2019, a 4-part docuseries directed by Jordan Peele came out titled Lorena, and it highlighted how she became the laughingstock of the United States as her husband toured around and slandered her name, which is insane. And Jordan Peele is an incredibly talented director, and I've watched this series. It's great. And it is very unfortunate what happened to Lorena Bobbitt. I mean, like all around. The following year, a movie titled I Was Lorena Bobbitt, produced by Lifetime, way worse than Jordan Peele, showed viewers her side of the story, including what happened the night of the incident and her life following the case. And it includes her work fighting for other victims of SA abuse of all kinds, which is, you know, there's just a clear, you know, it is so up that this guy was able to be like, yeah, I'm John Wayne Bobbitt, the Franken guy. And then just serially beating women and just sort of getting away with it in a sense. He did go to jail a couple times and whatnot, but, and then Lorena is just like, she's crazy. She did punch her mom. She definitely punched her mom. And she was also acquitted because of insanity. But like, a form, right? Okay. In the interviews, she continues the same segments, defending her name and undoing several years of bad PR that she had no control over. She really advocates for other women who suffered from sexual assault, for them to stand up for themselves and reach out, which is amazing. She wants other people to not have to endure what she did and hopes to make an actual change, which is awesome. Also, she was an immigrant into the country. I mean, like, this whole thing is just like, it's very up how twisted it was for such a long time. It's good to see the cream rising to the top. This new campaign seems to be very similar to what John was doing as the case was going on, and it also seems to be working. But the real difference is that one is good, that's what Lorena is doing, and one was his early campaign of self-victimization has completely withered away, and everyone has turned on him, which makes him look like a psycho serial abuser. He was definitely able to ride the hype train while the case was still fresh, but there's nowhere for this guy to turn at all. He can't play the victim to garner attention. The truth is actually out there and fairly easy to find with a simple Google. And hopefully this video will help be factual. Lastly, and fun fact, following the case, many copycat cases would arise, hoping to latch onto the same amount of fame and fortune that the Bobbitts came onto. So people were getting their dinkuses chopped off, their chopped off because of this. It's like wasn't a thing, and then it became a thing. It became a meme, a mimetic virus. So if that doesn't show you how big the case was, then I don't know what will. All right, guys. John and Lorena Bobbitt clearly had a very unhealthy relationship that needed to end in divorce. However, it took violence to tip everything over the edge, and once this occurred, it seemed like everyone in the United States was waiting to hear what would happen, what developments were there. And, you know, people had their skin in the game. Same with OJ's trial, all this stuff. All these trials become this massive thing. And now we've got Amber Heard, Johnny Depp. Amber Heard allegedly shit on Johnny Depp's bed. I'm not sure if that's kind of changed hands at all. It seems like people really like Johnny Depp now. They didn't like it before. But I've also seen people say that they hate him, and they're like the sort of believe all women type of people. I don't really know what the exactly is going on with it. Things change. Truth comes out, opinions change. The most important thing is to be able to keep an open mind, I think. But obviously when you're presented with this type of information, it's, you know, it's fairly obvious what the right thing to believe is. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, press the like button down below. If you want to see more content, leave some suggestions on what I should cover in future videos. Go to sour.gg, buy some candy, and join the Gump Club to see an uncensored version of each video. No curse, swear, censors and shit. YouTube makes us cut so much stuff out. Like I recorded, this was an hour and 11 minutes of a recording, and it'll be 30 minutes long, probably 35 minutes long, something like that. Anyways, and you guys are watching.